Yeah, the history of Marvel is really filled with a lot of dark corners, and I wanted to, in writing my book, just kind of tease those out a little bit from the shadows, and I found quite a few, and most of them involve the relationships between the creators and the owners.
And when you say owners, you're talking about the not the editorial level, but the upper level of who controlled the properties and who owned the properties.
Yeah. Yeah. So throughout the history of Marvel, there has been a very fraught relationship, I guess, between the corporate owners of the company and the people who are actually creating the characters. It kind of comes in, it goes in cycles and waves, and probably a lot of the major disagreements that you hear about stem from the fact that these people kind of threw out all their dreams, into this big pot, and then they were inevitably forced to walk away from that. Nobody really had much of a stake financially. And so Marvel just keeps rolling and snowballing and collecting the imagination of the people who it pays flat rates.
And was this something that was kind of continuous at the time? Were there any kind of, and I kind of know the answers to some of these, but was there ever talk of like forming unions and getting ownership to the creators of the books, or was that just something that was a per page thing? You signed everything away when you signed the check and you had nothing at all? Was there any talk of, hey guys, we did this? For
a while in the late 70s, there was talk of, starting a union among comic book writers and artists. The corporate powers that be convinced most of the creative people that the comic industry was in no shape to support, any kind of higher royalties or higher rates. And so it pretty much died out pretty quickly. To this day, there's no union for comic book creators.
So let's talk about Lee and Kirby specifically. Let's talk about the creation of the Fantastic Four. Talk about maybe not necessarily who did what, who thought up what. Was it were they congenial? Talk about Lee Kirby and the creation of the Fantastic Four.
Yeah. So Jack Kirby had been at Marvel in 1940, 41. He went way back with the company. He and Joe Simon created Captain America, and they left, pretty shortly, 10 issues into the publication of Captain America. Around the time that Captain America #1 came out, Stan Lee, who was related to the publisher, came in as an errand boy. And when Joe Simon and Jack Kirby left, Stan Lee moved into the role of editor of Marvel Comics. So flash forward, 16 years, and in the late
Flash
forward 16 years, and in the late 50s, Stan Lee is running the show still. It's a pretty small show because there have been a lot of problems with the comics industry. Jack Kirby, who's been working elsewhere all that time, comes back because he has no other options. He's been blacklisted from DC Comics for something that wasn't his fault. And he goes to work with Stan Lee again. They do a lot of monster comic books. And they're these ridiculous, just huge creatures that stomp around and scare citizens, and it's kind of a rehash every time. In the early 60s, Martin Goodman, the story goes, Martin Goodman, the publisher of Marvel Comics, supposedly went to a golf game with the head of DC Comics and heard that this group of superheroes was selling really well. So Goodman demanded that his people, namely Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, come up with something to compete with that. Basically, the first issue of Fantastic Four is just another monster comic with people who happen to have superpowers. If you look at the first issue, it's really, it's almost amateurish. It's really shambolic looking. Jack Kirby's art looks, a little bit rushed. The writing is a little confusing. There's flashbacks and flash forwards. But for whatever reason, it became a big hit. And that pretty much opened the floodgates for the Marvel Universe as we know it. They started introducing more and more characters. And within a couple of years, you have Spider-Man and the X-Men and the Avengers with new characters like Iron Man and Thor. Captain America gets brought back. So just in a few short years, you've got the stage set for what will 50 years later become the biggest movie franchises of all time.
So talk about maybe the point during, I guess the 70s, when people started to realize within Marvel that they had properties that they could exploit in other markets, television, maybe movies, and how that process developed and how maybe Stan Lee had been a part of that.
Starting in the...
I guess when did the idea come that we can, exploit all these characters in other medium?
Yeah. The idea that the Marvel characters could become successful in other media really started out in around 1965 or 66, and you saw the Marvel cartoon characters on television. Stan Lee, who of course had grown up a big fan of the movies, really wanted to move everything into Hollywood. By the late 60s, Stan Lee was talking about, just chucking everything in the comics industry, and in private conversations, Stan Lee was talking about getting Jack Kirby to go out to Hollywood with him and create movies. That never happened, but Stan Lee became set on the idea of going out to Los Angeles and turning all the Marvel characters into film properties. Stan Lee gets out to Hollywood in 1980, finally, and he finds that it's a little bit harder than he thought to magically turn these things into films. So imagine this guy who co-created a whole slew of already icons, and he goes out to Hollywood and he spends 5, 10, 12 years and has almost nothing to show for it. There are a bunch of low budget movies, there's some crappy TV movies, but in 1992 it sort of seems like things are starting to come together. Jim Cameron is doing a Spider-Man movie for Carol Co. That's exciting. Wesley Snipes is signed up to be the Black Panther. Wes Craven is all set to direct Doctor Strange. So by this time there seems to be a little bit of like a critical mass. These are big names, and these are going to become big properties. It's sure. They can't lose finally. So there's a company called Toy Biz, and they are the ones who make Marvel's toys, and they have the exclusive rights to that. And one of the guys at Toy Biz is named Avi Arad. In April of 1993, Toy Biz makes a deal that they will have in perpetuity the rights to making toys out of the Marvel comics. So they're going to get the rights to the toys for Marvel Comics. Marvel says to Toy Biz, we will give you the rights to these toys in perpetuity, exclusively, in exchange for 46% of your company. This turns out to be a great deal for Toy Biz down the line. The immediate result of this is that Avi Arad, who has played a big role in the success of the X-Men cartoon on Fox, becomes, with Stan Lee, one of the guys who's running Marvel's film department. And Avi Arad is really eager to make movies and really eager to make big movies. So when Avi Arad joins Stan Lee as kind of co-head of the film department at Marvel Comics, he's really eager to make big movies. And he finds pretty quickly that his bosses are not quite as excited about making big movies. They just want to license them. Now, Marvel isn't really excited about actually making the movies. They just want to license them. So Avi Arad finds that his hands are tied a little bit, but he does have one really big success in the first 6 months of working with Stan Lee and Marvel. In 1993, Marvel sells the rights to make an X-Men movie to 20th Century Fox. So he's got a little bit of a head of steam going, and when he finds out that there's a low-budget Fantastic Four movie coming along, maybe he's not that excited to see what's going to happen with it. Maybe he would rather just call the shots on every movie that has anything to do with Marvel. So Avi Arad is, coming into his new job as a very successful toy company entrepreneur. He's very, very confident. I think he tells one reporter, in baseball, if you're hitting 300, you're doing great. I've been hitting 800. So Avi Arad has just sold the X-Men rights to 20th Century Fox. And with all the other deals that are in place from before he got there, things are looking really good. And Marvel, in fact, has been telling the comic book part of its business, you guys are only 10% of what we're doing now. We are going to become merchandising. We are going to become a toy juggernaut, and we are going to sell baseball cards too. We're going to be doing all these other things, and obviously the movies are a crucial part of that. So when Avi Arad hears about this Fantastic Four movie that's been made on a really low budget, he's probably not very happy about it. This could mess up everything that he's been working for. This could mess up everything he's responsible for and everything that he's looking to make a name out of. So, I would guess that when Avi Arad hears about this movie, he figures maybe I can squash it. The story that I heard was that Avi Arad was in Puerto Rico, and he was talking to this kid who said, "Are you going to be, going to that Fantastic Four premiere?" And Avi said, "What Fantastic Four premiere?" When Avi heard this, he went to the telephone, and the details of the conversation that he had, and specifically who he was even speaking to, are maybe up for some debate. But I heard that he offered to buy the film for a couple million, and then he burned the negative.
Oh, stop tape. So great. While it may not be the case, there's kind of an underlying current of kind of failure when it comes to trying to get the Fantastic Four and put them on screen and make everybody happy. Is there anything about the property that you think makes it inherently difficult? Is it the relationships between the characters? Is it the wackiness of their existence? Why haven't we seen a really good Fantastic Four movie yet?
Yeah, I don't know why the Fantastic Four has had such trouble translating to the screen. I do remember in the late 90s, this might be just totally...
That's fine, I'll cut it if it's not, but I do remember.
Larry Marder, who was... hold on.
Okay.
In the late 90s, Marvel had,
That's fine.
this is the one. In the late 90s, Marvel reset a bunch of their characters in the comic books. And one of the stories that went around was that they, the Fantastic Four, for instance, as they originally existed in the comic, was not a concept that was working for Hollywood. And so Jim Lee, one of their biggest artists, revamped the Fantastic Four. And this was, as much as anything, this was a way to walk into a pitch meeting in Hollywood and hand them the comic book and say, here, this is our new vision of what the Fantastic Four could be.
And what was that? What did Jim Lee come up with?
I don't remember.
Okay. I don't know if it was like an Ultimates thing or whatever.
It was like Heroes Reborn.
Yes, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember that.
I can, if you want to look for like a scan or something, I can.
Okay.
Maybe.
All right. I thought it was too.
Also, maybe I should just.
We're rolling, so whatever you want to do.
Yeah. So Stan Lee had done a lot of the universe building of the Marvel Universe with the partnership of his artists. And in fact, Jack Kirby probably did the heavy lifting on plots and the character concepts of the Fantastic Four. There's an old story about how the Silver Surfer was never in any of the conversations that Lee and Kirby had beforehand, and that it just kind of popped up when Stan Lee got the pages and he said, "Oh, what's this?" And if you go back and look at the original issues, if you go back and look at the original issues that the Silver Surfer is in, the plot would make no sense without the Silver Surfer character, which means that Kirby was plotting it.
How do you feel? Go ahead.
Yeah.
How do you feel about Kirby? Okay, do you have something else?
I was just going to say I feel like there's a bridge there to Stan Lee's role in it, but I don't know how much.
Yep. I think what you said already is plenty that what I'm going to use, but I'm just curious too. Is like, what is your opinion on Kirby's legacy?
Yeah. So. This is changing a little bit now, but Jack Kirby is kind of the unsung hero of the Marvel Universe. Steve Ditko was the guy who did most of the work on Spider-Man with Stan Lee, and Jack Kirby is the guy who did most of the work on the Avengers and X-Men, and I'm blanking on what these creations
Fantastic
are.
Four.
Yeah. And Jack Kirby is the guy who really probably did most of the plotting and character creation for the Fantastic Four and the Avengers, Captain America, the X-Men, maybe even Daredevil. No. It's concept, not plot. Stan Lee was a pretty good writer of dialogue, and he was a good springboard for ideas, I think. He was an amazing art director. He was a terrific editor, and he was a really influential PR person for Marvel. It's not to take anything away from him to say that Jack Kirby was the brains behind the Fantastic Four.
Maybe, and just going back to kind of the legacy of Kirby, do you think that he was treated unfairly? Do you think that he was given short shrift? Do you think that, I don't know if he died penniless, which I doubt he did,
No.
but he didn't revel and enjoy the successes that Stan Lee did.
Yeah.
So what is, how do you feel about how Kirby ended up?
Yeah. So the Fantastic Four is, I think officially recognized, if not legally, as a creation of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. It turns out that probably Jack Kirby did most of the creative stuff that spawned this movie, for instance. Jack Kirby's been kind of written out of history in terms of, you know, the larger audience of Marvel movies, for instance. He did. So Jack Kirby's been pretty much written out of history. There's kind of now bubbling up a movement to give him, you know, wide recognition that he richly deserves. But you know, Stan Lee has sort of naturally moved into the spotlight. That's what he likes, and Jack Kirby is, you know, no longer alive to, you know, enjoy that.
Perfect. Stop date.